Okay, and this is part 2 of the reading video. In the last video we covered, we went through and rigged up all the joints and put the joints in place. So we have the IK controls that will move the hands and the legs. We have them down here also, and we also put the reverse lock foot in there. So now we're going to start going through and putting all the control joints that will control it so we don't have to grab the bones to animate our character. Alright, so the first thing I want to do, now that I have the reverse lock joint put in place, I want to go and start connecting them. So this part can get rather tricky, so kind of pay attention to which parts are being selected, because there's 2 of them now. The larger radius one is the one that I have labeled as the reverse lock. So I'm going to grab the reverse lock first, because this one's going to be the one in charge, and I'm going to grab the shift and grab the ankle. So this will be the IK joint, and so the ankle, the reverse lock ankle, will control the IK. So now that I have both those selected, so that was the parent first and then the child, I'm going to go over to constrain, and I'm going to do a point constraint on this one. So open up the options box and make sure maintain offset is in place, and then press apply. So what happens now is that if I grab the IK, it moves the original foot, but now if I grab the reverse lock ankle, it should move the whole foot. So this new ankle joint, the only one I'm selecting now, is moving the whole foot. And so that's what we're going to go for. We're going to have this whole joint control the IK. So the next step is to take the reverse lock ball joint, not the ball joint of the original joint, just put the reverse lock ball, and that's going to control the ankle, which is the smaller one. So if I hold down shift and grab this one, so we have the parent, which is the reverse lock ball, the child, which is the ankle, and it says right here left ankle joint. This is not going to be point. This one's going to be constrain, orient constrain, pull up options, and make sure maintain offset is checked. So I press apply on this one, and so now when I take the reverse lock ball and go to rotate, it should rotate this. So this joint is controlling the whole IK setup now. So let's do this one more time. The reverse lock is going to be the parent, and because we're using the menu system, you have to do parent-child. If you're pressing P on the keyboard, it's child-parent. Very confusing. So this is going to be our parent. Parent gets selected first. This is the reverse lock toe. Then we're going to hold shift and grab the ball joint, so the next one backwards. This is the ball joint, not the reverse lock ball. And then we're going to press apply again for the orient constraint maintain offset. Apply that. So now when I test this, I grab just the reverse lock toe, and I were to rotate this, you can see that it rotates the whole toe upwards, so we can basically stand on his toe if we wanted to. So Control Z to put that back in place, make sure that the values return back. And you can test it with like the move tool. You can see it moves, but we want to make sure the heel moves. So the heel should move everything now. If it goes too low, that's fine, it kind of separates, but basically when the character walks, he'll step flat-footed onto his step, rather than before, which is kind of uncontrollable, kind of just iffy where it was landing. Now we have the ability to take the heel and step right where he wants. In addition to that, we're also going to have the ability to bend up on his heel, and when we get to it, we're also going to be able to have him stand on his toe, so we can bend in all those locations. Alright, so now that we have all of that parented together, that's how it should look, so you can test yours and make sure yours is doing the same motions where they're connected like this, depending on which one I grab. So these are all the reverse locks that I'm grabbing. The reverse locks are controlling the original joints. And so the IK, if I were to move that, you can see it's a child, it's not the parent. Okay, so now we're going to start creating some controls. And controls, instead of having to grab these bones, we're going to I guess if I put this in reference mode, you can see the bones are sitting inside here. We're going to turn those off. But let's go put some joints in here. I'm going to close out that. We're going to go to Curves tab. And I'm going to take a circle curve, and I'm going to draw it somewhere around here. So that's going to be the control for the foot, and you can make this a lot more fancy if you want. Let's say I'm going to center this a little more, scale it downwards to about there. Let's say move it forward some more, and I'm not going to spend too long in this, but you can make it pretty fancy. So that's pretty centered in that direction, and then scale it this direction, and then I can right click and go to the control vertex, and then I can start grabbing, let's say, more of these and scale this one in some more. I could take these, oops, control vertex. If you grab joints while doing something else, the joints take precedence. I can move these over here, take this one over here, grab this one, and kind of orient these in a way that kind of resembles a foot. And that's probably close enough for what we're aiming for. Alright, so you get the idea. You can play with the curves. So let's go to object mode. Alright, so now this is going to be our left foot control. Alright, so we have it named left foot control, so we know what this is. We also want to get rid of all these translates. So when the animator is animating, they can zero it out, and that drops their foot back in the correct location. So modify, freeze transformations. I'm going to freeze transformations, and that wipes them all to zeros, except for scale, which is 1. So now every time you press 0, it resets the foot back to the starting position. So now we have that worked out. We also want to go through, and I guess I can color this. So right now, instead of blue, I could have 2 different colors between the 2 of them. I also want to get rid of the history, so let's delete out the history right here. So edit, delete by type, history. And that clears out the history, so it's a clean, finished object. And if I want to change the color, if you press or hold Control and then press A, it pulls up the attribute editor, which is also right here with this little option right here. And since we're selected on this guy, on this curve that we made, we have the option to go down to Object Display, and then down here under Drawing Overrides, you then can click on Enable Overrides, and you can start picking colors. Let's say I want to have, I'll go with a blue for the left foot. So when I click off of it, you can see it's a blue ring now, so I've made a blue ring. I also want to put the pivot point, so I want to press Insert on the keyboard, and now I can hold the V key and middle mouse push down, and it'll snap right to the ankle. So now when I press Insert again, it'll jump out of pivot point mode, and I can take this and move it around wherever I want. But we also need to make sure it's connected. Before I do that, let's go and put this on the other side as well. So I'm going to go Control D to duplicate it, and I'm going to V snap it to the other side so it locks in place. But I also want to mirror this, so let's change this back to the attribute editor, or not, take off the attribute editor. Let's scale it in the X direction by -1. And so that pops it the other direction, so now it fits perfectly, but let's clear out the history, or not the history, but the transforms. So modify, freeze transformations, and that zeroes that out. So this is a brand new clean orientation when you animate it, and so is this one, but they also both fit together. Alright, so after that we want to go through and I guess we're also lock and hide some of these things, so we want to be able to use translates and rotates, but we probably don't need scale and visibility, so right click, lock and hide selected, clear out those out, and just do the same thing over here. Right click, lock and hide, clear the tracks out of there, so we still have the ability to move and rotate it. And let's change this to a red color, so Control A pops up this, and let's slide this over to, I'll use red. So now I have a red foot and a blue foot, so I can easily differentiate which foot is what, which if he gets moved out of place or moved around. Alright, so that should work there, and we also need to, I guess, parent this. So let's take the heel. So this is going to be the child, this is going to be the parent, and we're going in child-parent order, which means we can press P on the keyboard. And so now when I grab the curve, I can move the curve. And I can rotate the curve, and so he'll bend upwards. But we're not going to use the rotation on here to do all that. But you do have the option to rotate, let's say, if you wanted to go sideways. We're going to create another option for that. So let's click on this one and do the same thing. We're going to, actually, child, parent, P on the keyboard. That locks it, so this one should be able to move all of that. I also didn't go through and do all of the joint attaching, so you'll need to do that for this one, but I'll save you the time and pause the video and just do that. But yeah, just repeat the same process of all the steps that we're doing here to the other foot when we get to that. So let me finish up with this foot. We're going to go through and create some attributes. So if I go back to the main channel box, which is this option, we want to add one for foot roll. So I'm going to go over to Modify, Add Attribute. In order to do that, make sure you're selected on the ring first. If you're not on the ring, you won't be able to add it to it. So I'm on the ring selected. I'm going to go add one, and I'm going to call this foot roll. And it's going to be a float, and I'm going to have a minimum of, let's say, -10 and a maximum of 10. So I have a foot roll, float value, which is a decimal place number, and the numbers are between -10 and +10. So I'm going to, I guess I'll just press add. I'll close that. If I press OK, it would have finished it. I still have to do it for the other side eventually. Alright, so what that did is it put a foot roll attribute on our channel list. So now we can click on this, and if I use the middle mouse, push down while inside the viewport window, and scroll to the left and right, you can see that it goes between all the numbers all the way to -10 and +10. So it locked my two variables between those two set points by setting a min and max, and so the animator can now adjust the foot roll. So now that we have an attribute, let's set the attribute to control the actions that are going to occur here. To do that, we need to be in the Animation tab and go over to Animate, Set Driven Key, and Set. This will bring up an options box, and we have what's called the driver and the driven. The driver is going to control the other object, which is the driven. So the first object I select is the curve. So the curve should be selected, and I'm going to load that as the driver. So now this driver, this control curve, will control what happens to everything else. And specifically, we have the options of translate, rotate, and foot roll, as you can see right here. And I specifically want the foot roll control that we just made that goes between 10 and -10 to control something. So what is the something? I'm going to click on the heel, the reverse lock heel that we made, reverse lock heel, and I'm going to say load as driven. So this pops in as the driven. So the control curve will control the heel. But what attributes of the heel do I want it to control? I also want to control more of the joints and not just the one. So with the one selected, just click here, I'm going to hold shift and grab the next one, which is the toe, reverse lock toe. And be careful which ones you're grabbing. We want to grab the reverse lock ball as well. So all three of these are selected, and load these as driven. So you can see all three pop in. So we want to key all three of these into certain positions. I don't necessarily need the reverse lock ankle, so that's okay. So I'm going to take and grab all three of these, and I want to key the Z rotations, so rotate Z. So with all these selected, if you have these unselected, let's say it's not selected, it's not going to work, you have to have it all selected. So the foot roll attribute right here, when it's set to 0, will control all three of these joints at the rotate Z, and we have to figure out where we want it to rotate. So at first I'm going to say when it's 0, leave it like this, so I'm going to click the key button and set key, and that should set a key. Now I'm going to say on the foot roll, I want this to be 10, so I'm typing in 10. So it doesn't change anything because we haven't made a change yet, but we've picked the maximum value that it can be is 10. So I'm going to go over here to the toe joint, and I'm going to click the rotate button and rotate it all the way up. So it looks like he's standing on his toes, somewhere about there, but also click this joint and rotate this one back. So depending on how straight you want it to be, it may be exaggerated and too straight, but now he's on his toe, so that's the middle of his heel, and that's the back of the heel, so he's standing on his toe. Once we have that position, you can pick numbers, certain numbers if you like to keep things nice and rounded. So minus 38. So once those are selected, we're going to take all three of these again, and we're going to take the rotate Z, and we're going to key it. And so what that does is when we go back to here, the foot roll, number 10, so when it's at 10, it'll look like this position. So if I go and click the word here and the middle mouse drag here, oops, the foot roll, you can see that it'll assume that position when it reaches 10, and when it reaches 0, if it goes negative, we haven't keyed a negative yet. Alright, so I want to put this to negative 10. So once the foot roll is set to negative 10, we'll decide what it should look like at negative 10. So this is already selected, the foot roll is already selected, all three joints are selected, and rotate Z, all I have to do is define where it should look like. So I'm going to grab the heel joint of the reverse lock, spin this upwards, and you want to rotate it until it looks like the knee is popping. So you can see it's flexing, 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 and then it locks. So we don't want to go that far to the locking position. We want to go just a little outside the locking, this way you don't get popping during your animation. And make sure you've only rotated the one joint. I'll round off and say a nice even number like 43. And then everything is still selected. All of these channels are all highlighted. So I can press key. So now when I click back on this control joint, at minus 10, the foot will be up to here. So I can click on the roll and roll backwards. So at 0, it's here. At 10, it's up to here. Back to 0, and back to minus 10. So the animator has the ability to control these curves. Let's do one more thing. Let's set this back to 4, I guess. So at 4, it's starting to bend. What happens is, usually you don't lift your toe off the ground. When you're walking forward, you still have some weight sitting on your toe, but your heel's coming up. So let's take this one, and while we're still at 4, I can set this back to 0. So it zeroes that out, and I can take this reverse lock, and I can rotate this one upwards to, let's say, 24 is a nice number. So that'll rotate this, so he's going to be applying pressure on his toe, but the heel will start popping off the ground when he reaches the 4 position. So everything is still connected. We'll press key, and so now when I go back to the control, you can see the foot roll at 4 is this position. But if I keep going further, it lifts off the ground. So pre number 4, it's just the heel coming off. So if I go into the negatives, it's up on his heel. If I go positive, he starts leaning forward. And after 4, he starts lifting off until his toe is about to leave the ground. So we've created a nice foot roll control. And you can put a lot more different controls and attributes on here. But for a basic rig that we're working with, that's good enough for a foot roll. So you still have the option to go click here and rotate this. You can also rotate this if you wanted to. But we have now is that we can step onto something, and while we're stepping, we can also start keying how he's going to land with his feet. So that makes it a little easier in that respect. So all those steps we just covered, we want to do again on this foot. But I'm going to pause the video and run through that without showing you. It'll save you some time. It's the exact same steps. Everything's the same. We just have to do it to the other foot. So let me go through that. So actually, let me just record this again real quick. It should only take about 5 minutes. If you want to skip this part, you can, but I'll record it really quick. So we'll take the reverse lock ankle as the parent. Hold shift, grab the IK, and that'll be the child. We'll constrain a point constraint on there so that the ankle, if I move it, will move the IK. Cool. Let's grab the reverse lock, which is the larger one, so reverse lock ball. Then we'll hold shift and grab the little smaller one, which is the just regular ankle. We're going to do a constrain, orient constrain, make sure maintain offsets on there, apply. And then one more, grab the reverse lock toe. We'll grab the little bone on the inside, which is the regular ball joint, and add that one. So that the result is this one should rotate everything upwards. Alright, so once that's done, I guess we can start putting the attributes on there, but I might as well just attach this real quick. So this one, hold shift, grab this one as the parent, P. So now when I take the main foot control, I can move the whole foot around. So now I just have to add the attributes onto the foot. So we'll go to the control curve that I need, modify add attribute. We'll call this foot roll. I'll have a minimum of -10 and a maximum of 10. We'll add those on there. So I have the foot roll control. Let's go and start setting some attributes. So animate, set driven key, set, pulls up the window. The one controlling everything is going to be the control curve, so load that as the driver. And the foot roll is going to be what's the attribute controlling everything. Then we need to grab our joints. So I'm going to grab the ones being controlled, which would be, I guess, the heel, the toe. So hold shift and grab the toe, and the ball. So these are all the reverse locks. So don't grab the original joints, the small ones. Just grab the reverse lock, heel, toe, and ball. Load those as driven. We have all three of those reverse locks. And all of these are going to control the rotate Z's. So that's everything. All three are selected. And while this is foot roll set to 0 and everything's all intact, we'll key it. Alright, so next up we're going to change our position. So we're going to say when this one has a rotation value, let's scale it upwards, somewhere up pretty high. I guess we used last time, which is around 85 or so. And then we'll reverse this one backwards. And we used about a -38 last time. Alright, just to keep the numbers accurate. And so once that's done, which position is this? We'll grab the original. This is going to be when the foot is at 10. So the highest position, oops, should have changed the number first. Alright, so set this back to rotation value of 85 and this one at 38. Oops, -38. Okay, so that puts it back at there, and the foot roll is set to 10, so we'll key that. Alright, and then let's roll it backwards into 4. And then we'll take this guy, we'll set him to 0, and we'll take this one and rotate him up higher. I think we used a value of about, I think it was 38 we used last time. Alright, and I could be off on the numbers, but I think that was what we had. So once we have that, we'll key it. We'll grab the original foot control, set it to -10, and then we'll grab the heel and rotate that up. I think we had the heel basically to the point where you rotate it, it doesn't click. I think we had 43 for that one. Alright, so 43. We'll key that, and that should set everything. Let's go back to this one and grab the foot roll and roll that, and you can see that it rolls the foot. I think the 4 value might be a little bit high. Oops, foot roll. Yeah, I don't think we used 4. I think we used 24 when we did that one. So let's put this back to 4, just to keep things consistent. When all these are back to here, this joint right here was actually probably at 24, I think. And we'll rekey that. Alright, so that should adjust that. We'll grab the foot roll, so we should roll forward and roll backwards. And that should pretty much finish up this. We'll put that back at 0, and we'll zoom out. Alright. So now that the other foot's been finished, we have both options here. We can grab the one foot, we can move that around. We can grab the other foot, we can move that around. And they both have their foot roll controls on there. So the next step we want to go through, we want to go and add a knee control. So the problem is when you move the foot, his knee always aims forward. So what if we wanted his knee to turn out to the other direction? Even if we were to rotate this, it doesn't rotate the knee. So we need a knee control that can do that. So to do that, it's relatively simple. We need to make a control that can use it. What I could do is I can go to the curves. I can draw a new curve if I wanted to. I can make a circle. But I could also do something a little more fancy. Let's say I go over to Create, Polygon Primitive, and Platonic Solids. Click on the option box for that. And you have a couple options. You have some over here. I'm going to click on octahedron, and you can see a picture of what it's going to look like. So I'm going to go draw that on the grid, and this is just for decoration purposes to make it fancy. You don't have to actually do this, you could just make a ring. And the problem with this right now, if I press render, it looks great, but I see it. I don't want to see my controls when I press render. I want to see just the finished object. So I'm going to draw a new line on top. So click the line tool, or the curve tool, with linear set in place. I'm going to hold the V key for snapping, and then left mouse and click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just keep going around the rest of the whole thing. So keep holding V the whole time, click down to there, up to there, and you can backtrack down the same line if you need to go around the corners. And so what this is doing is it's basically tracing all the edges. Press enter to finish it, and then I can click on this whatever it was, dihedron or tetrahedron or something like that, and delete that out of the scene. So what's left now is a neat little line tool that we snapped all the points to. So I'm going to go call this left knee control. Alright, and the left knee control, we're going to go move this into place. So the pivot isn't centered yet, so modify center pivot. So the pivot's in place. I'm going to go V-snap it right onto the legs of the knee. So it's perfectly in place. As you can see, it's a bit large, so I'm going to scale this down. Alright, that looks pretty decent. And then I'm going to go back to the move tool, Control D to duplicate it, V snap it onto the next one, so now I have both of these. Grab both of these knee controls and pull them straight out, so now they're perfectly aligned and in place. Let's go and modify freeze transformations on both of these, so they're both cleaned out. And I don't think there's any history on these. Nope, there's no history. But I could also delete history if there was history. And then we're going to go Control A so I can pick some colors. Object display, drawing overrides, enable overrides. I'm going to set this to a blue color. And it looks like it's set the wrong one. So I want this one to be red. And this one, enable overrides, to be a blue. So now I know which foot is which and which knee is which, because they correspond by colors now. And this should be renamed to right knee control. Alright, so that sets up the two knee controls, so they have 0 on all their attributes. I have two different ones, they're named correctly, they're in the right positions. So once all of that's set in place, I'm going to select both of these at once. I don't need to, actually I don't even need to rotate, so I'm not going to rotate, scale, or check visibility. So I'm going to right click and lock and hide selected. I should have done that for both of these now. Yep, and all I need now is the translate to move this around. So to attach this control to our knees, we're going to click one at a time. I'm going to click the left one, and then I'm going to shift and click on that IK handle, which is that crosshair kind of sitting down there, and then go over to constrain, pull vector, and click on that, and it'll automatically put a vector right to our point. So if I were to move this now, you can see that it moves his knee. So if I were to take his foot and move his foot upwards, and then move this, you can see that it controls the direction his knee is facing. So pretty cool. So let's do that again real quick. We take this piece, and we go down to find a little crosshair, hold shift, grab the other one, and then go over to constrain pull vector. And now I have another control for the other knee. Alright, so the knees are done, the feet are done, and the whole lower body is pretty much set and rigged now. So let's go and move up to, I guess, the chest area. So for the chest, we're going to need some more control rings. So let me go and put a ring right here, and I'll draw it there. And then I'll say hold the V key and snap it. I'm going to snap it to the top of the hip bone, which is the very top one right there. Alright, once that's in place, I can scale this and scale it inwards. And let me turn this back to reference mode so I can see what I'm looking at. You can see it's not quite centered where the bone was set in place. So I'm going to go and move this, but instead of moving the whole center, and I could re-pop a new pivot there, I can right click and go into control vertex mode. And if I try and grab this, it probably won't work because it'll grab the joints which are hidden underneath here. So back to shading. Sometimes it glitches. You see it's checked, but it's not showing it. So uncheck it, shading, check it again, Usually it happens when you reopen a new file, or open a file that had originally been worked on. Alright, so if the joints are there, you're going to select the joints. So if I go show and hide the joints, then I can go through and grab these easier. So grab this, control vertex, grab all these, and now I don't have to worry about the joints. So let's turn the joints back on now that I've grabbed them. I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go and move this and kind of center it a little more around him. Scale it a little more. Alright, so this is going to be his hip control. So I can move his hips. And since this is hips, I could even move it down a little bit lower so I can see that this is going to modify his hip location. What happens is when I jump back out into object mode, you can see that the pivot point is still where we snapped it. So by going into component mode, we can readjust the geometry or the curve and rearrange it to whatever we want, and it doesn't move the pivot. But if I were to move the pivot, you can see it moves the ring. I can also go to insert move and move the pivot if I want to. But this works pretty well. So the next thing is I'm going to take this, and since I don't need any transforms on there, I can go modify, freeze transformations, clears up that. I don't need the history, so edit, delete by type history, cleans up our file a bit. I don't need set drawing key either. Let's close that out. And I can change some colors again because this doesn't have a blue or red. I can pick a different color. By default, this is a dark blue color. If I wanted to pick, let's say, green, I can go Control A, pull up the attribute editor, and enable overrides and pick, let's say, a I'm sure there's a bright green in here somewhere. There it is, bright green. Alright, so I have a bright green color on the guy, and this is going to be called the, press Control A to get rid of that. This is the hips control. Alright, so that's been labeled and named and everything. So before I start attaching it, let me duplicate that a couple times to reuse this. So I'm going to press Control D, move this up a little, and hold the V key and snap onto here. So you can see it's snapping all over the place, probably because he is in reference mode, and in reference mode it can still grab vertices on the mesh. So I'm going to turn this into template mode, so now I can go through and V-snap this easier. So V-snap, sometimes that still doesn't work, so just move it out of the way and V and click it again. So that pops it in place now, locks it right onto the lower back joint. Put this back in reference mode so I can see it. As you can see, it's not quite centered. So what I can do is go modify center pivot. So now it's perfectly centered, and I can go back and re-snap this into place. Alright, so now you can see the ring is perfectly snapped around his waist. And it's right on top of the joint, whereas this one was lowered a little bit just so it makes a little more visual sense. So this is the hips control, this is the lower back. So let's rename this to back control. Now let's duplicate this again, Control D, V-snap, put that in template mode. Alright, and I could probably move this one down a little bit also. So I'll move it down. This way it keeps it underneath his chest armor, but it doesn't have to be moved down, it could just stay in place. So I'll leave it in place. Alright, so that one's there. That looks about right. I could probably move the lines a bit more forward for better control, but that's up to you. Let's name this one chest control, and copy one more. Control D to duplicate, hold the V key, V-snap it, turn off mesh to template mode, move that out of the way, and click it again. And let's scale this down. This will be his neck control. Alright, so neck control, chest, back, hips, and let's do one more for the head while we're here. I could rotate it in place, or I could just draw a new one in the front view. So let's pop that out, go to front view, and draw another circle right in the middle of them. Alright, let's put this in wireframe mode and pressing number 4, and I can kind of orient this. Let's X snap it to the grid, so hold X, it pops it to the grid. So now that I know he's centered on the grid, I can center this, I can scale it a bit more. Scale it down. Alright, and that should work pretty well. Alright, and if I wanted to, I could rotate it forward to kind of match the angle of this, but I might just take the joint and move that one backwards. So let's go back to side mode, put this in, pressing 4 on the keyboard to wireframe mode, and kind of center this back up. So I might just go straight with the joint instead. Alright, so the joint's straight up and down, and the curve's there, and this is going to be the head curve, or head control. Alright, so we have head control, neck control, and then all these curves, they need to be deleted on the history, cleared on the transformations. So let's grab all of these. So I have all of them, the curves selected now. Modify, freeze transformations, so to clear all of them. Edit, delete by type history in case there is any, and that clears out the history. So now all the curves are set in place. So now we just have to attach the curves to the rig. So to do this, we're going to say the hip control is going to be the parent of the hip bone. So if I click the bone holding shift, it'll grab the bone, which is the whole lower half of them, and I'll go to constrain, orient constrain, make sure maintain offset is turned on. We'll add that, or I'll just press apply. Alright, so we have now is that the hip bone, if I go to rotate this, will rotate his whole lower half. So if he's doing like the run cycle and he's twisting left and right, or walk cycle, we have hip controls. Let's go to the parent, child, which is the backbone. Actually, no, it's not the backbone. Yeah, it is, back joint. So we're going to go and apply that again. So we have another orient constraint in there. And so this should allow us to have his back bend forward. And then one more over here. We'll take this one, grab the chest joint, and apply that. And then the last for the neck area, we'll take the parent, which is the ring, the child, which is the joint, apply that. And the head, so parent is the ring, child is the head, and apply. Yep. Also, the head joint, probably I didn't move the pivot point, so let me press insert on that. Template the character, and V-snap the pivot down to his head area. This way when I rotate, it'll rotate from that point and rotate forward from that point. Alright, so all the controls have been added, and all the controls will work now. So if I rotate him forward, you can see he moves, but not quite accurately. I mean, it moves partially, but it would make more sense if the part below him moved everything above him. So let's go and parent the controls together. So let's say this one is parented to this one. Actually, let's start with the head. The head, hold down shift, grab the neck. The head is parented to the neck, so press P on the keyboard. And so when the head or the neck moves, it moves his head. And continuing down, we'll say, we'll start over. This one is the parent, or the child. This one is the parent, P on the keyboard. And so now when this ring moves, it moves everything above him. And repeat this a couple more times. Child, parent, P, child, parent, P. So I take, actually, scratch that, don't do it for the last one. We want the last one to be separate. We want to have the ability to move the hips like this, and you can move his hips, but not his upper body. This one will move his whole upper body, so we're going to leave it like that. Alright, so if you wanted to bend him forward, you can bend him forward in different stages. So a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, so he's gradually bending forward. It looks a little more realistic and easier to control with. Alright, so undo out all those changes right there that I was playing around with moving him. So we have all the controls built for him now. If we check this out, you can see they're easily accessible, easily grabbable. This one should probably be green also, so Control A, enable overrides, and set that to green. Right there. Alright, so those are the main body controls. And we've cleaned up all the different, actually we still have some things to clean up. This one, and this one, and this one, and pretty much all of these. None of these will need translates. We're not going to move any of these. These are all rotation positions, and I don't need scales either or visibility. So right click, lock and hide selected. That cleans those up. So now he has the ability to rotate in multiple different directions, but he doesn't need to move. These joints, these rings won't allow for motion. All right, so those are all finished up. So the next thing is to put the root bone on the hips. So the root bone will move pretty much the whole rig. So let's go over to create a new one. Instead of using the square, I'm just going to use the regular connect the dots. Let's close out that. Using the square keeps separate lines, so it's just better to use the connecting the dot. I'm going to hold down X on the keyboard for grid snap. Click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clicks. And now I can go to V and move. Let's template that again. And I can snap that right onto the root bone right at the bottom, and then scale this. So something that looks about right, and again you can play around and adjust this to whatever you think is an appropriate looking control. I'll go about that big. So this is going to be called the root control. Alright, root control. And because this is a root control, I'm going to make this a different color. So I'm going to enable overrides, and I'm going to make this a yellow. Alright, so root control will control all this. And the way we're going to do this one for attaching it, we're just going to go press the regular P button for parent. So this will be, unclick everything. The child is this main root joint. And shift, grab the control, and press P on the keyboard. That will parent the... let's go to move the parent, pretty much the whole rig to the root, which is why it's considered a root control. So you can move them around up and down and just kind of jump around with your rig. So that's pretty cool. And then that aside, there's the control, so you can move the hips around. So when he's doing a run cycle, you can spin the hips left and right, but you don't want to use the root to spin his hips left and right, because you're going to spin his entire rig if you do that. And so it's just better to spin the hips for that. So they all have their own purposes. Alright, so once the root control is done, alright, so the next step is going with the eyes. So let's go over to the eyes and the mouth and the tongue and do all the extra features up here. So we'll spend a little time with the face. To do this, we're going to need some bones. We're going to need a jawbone, a bone for the tongue, and string to sound, some bones for the eyes. You could parent the eyes to the rig, but then they kind of like light up every time you click on it, and you have big green glowing eyes. So it's just nice if you can bind the skin to it with the bone. Alright, so I'm going to go jump to the side view, put this in shaded mode, which is 5 on the keyboard. Let's go with the skeleton joint tool. And I'm going to go draw from where the jawbone should kind of occur. You can see the bone right here for the jaw. I'm going to start right about near the ear. Click there. And I can't see what I'm doing, so I'm going to check shaded x-ray joints and turn that back on again. So now I can see the joints. And click down here, right down to his chin. So this will be his jawbone. So it bends and flexes from around this part of his face and downwards with his chin. So press enter to confirm that. And let's call this bone jaw joint, and then I'll grab this one. I'll call this jaw end joint. I don't really need the end much, but it's there. It's part of the joint. All right. So the next thing, I'm going to need a tongue. So let me press 4 on the keyboard so I can see through the guy. Let's make another joint. Skeleton joint tool. I click where the tongue is, and then click where the tongue ends. Press enter, and then go and rename these. So this is the tongue joint. This is the tongue end joint. Alright, so that's set up. So the next thing we need to do is put the eyes in place, and the eyes can be a little tricky. We want to make sure these are perfectly accurate, perfectly centered inside of the character. If they're not centered, then you could get some stretching and distortion. Your eyes kind of like pop out of your head. So you have to make sure that it's like super centered. So I can go click once, and then click to the end, and kind of, if I hold the shift key, it'll lock it straight so I can't go sideways. Go right to the very edge of the eye, and press enter to confirm that. Let me rename this and I'll center it. So this is left eye joint. This is left eye and joint. Alright, so those are in place. Now in order to tell if this is like super centered, from this view it's kind of hard to tell. There are ways to snap it to the center of an object, but it's a little tricky. An easier method is to go to, let's say, polygons, draw a square that's kind of like right edge to edge wherever the eyes are, and then once you drag upwards, so just drag arbitrarily upwards, and then click here. Set the subdivision to 2, and that kind of splits lines so you can tell where the center of the square is, and since the square matches end of your eye to end of your eye, you can grab this and more or less center it on there. So I'm going to press insert mode and slide this right on top of that blue line so I can make sure it's perfectly centered inside the eye. Turn off insert, and now I no longer need that square. It's just a placeholder for me. So I can delete that out and then jump to the front of them. So I can see where I drill my bones right in the middle, which is great for the jaw and the tongue, but the eye isn't quite centered. So I'm going to grab the back of the eye. If you grab the front, you're only going to move the front joint, so Control Z that. So I'm going to grab the back, and in order to find the center, I can go shading, wireframe unshaded, and I can see where the center is, and I can kind of match it up that way. But the problem with doing this is that I slightly twisted his eyes while they were inside of his head while modeling. So even though you see a dot, and if I did this shaded here, you can see it's shaded, but the eye is slightly twisted, so my center of the eye is a little bit off. So depending on where you have it, try and get it as centered as possible. So this is between the 2 points since they got twisted, and up and down wise, it's right on top of that line. So it's as centered as I need to get it. All right, and again, if I did 5 shading wireframe unshaded, you can see it's not quite centered on the tip of the eye because the eye was rotated a little bit inside of his head when I modeled him. So let's turn shading back off. All right, so now we need to duplicate this. So I'm going to take this, which is now perfectly centered in place, Control D to duplicate, and slide this over. Go back to wireframe 4 on the keyboard, and center this joint as well as possible. All right, so in perspective mode, I can now see that both eyes are in place. Let me rename this one to right eye joint. Cool. All right, so the bones are now in place for his face. Let me turn off the wireframe when shaded. The next thing is to connect all of our bones together. So what's going to happen is the jaw is going to rotate. So if I go to rotate, you can see it's going to bend downwards. But while it's bending downwards, I want the tongue to move with it. So I'm going to take the tongue bone right here, not the end, but the bone itself. Hold Shift, grab the jawbone, and we're going to parent these together. So P on the keyboard. So what happens now? Actually, yeah, that should be fine. When I rotate down, you can see that it bends straight down. So the tongue moves with it. But if I want to move the tongue, I can click on the tongue, and I can bend the tongue, which is separate. So I can bend the jaw down, and I still have control of moving his tongue while his jaw is open. So let's put this back into place. We also need to attach the jaw to the head. So I'm going to take the jawbone, which is the big one, hold Shift, grab the head bone, press P for parent. So this is the child, the head bone is the parent. So when the character moves his head, it'll move his jaw with him. And the same for the eyes. Click the eye bone, the main one, not the end. Hold Shift, grab the face or the head bone, P for parent, and repeat. Grab the right eye, hold Shift, P for parent, and it connects all the pieces now. So in the character, and we can take the ring also, and rotate it, you can see that it rotates all the pieces of him around. And if he rotates from the other direction, you can see he rotates downwards. So, awesome. However, now we can't rotate the jaw. So we're going to need to make a jaw control so we don't have to grab the bone. We can rotate his head around, which is great, but we don't have the option to move the jaw yet. So let's go make a jaw control. So to make the jaw control, I'm going to go with another curve. So let's aim at the ground. Curves, a circle. Draw the circle on the grid. Okay. Let's right-click, go into Control Vertex, and let's delete some of these vertices. Let's take the back 3, delete, and delete those. So I have a bit of a curve right here, kind of a half curve, and then let's scale this curve in closer and scale it a little more that way, and then let's go to object mode. We'll take this, we'll go to move, and I'm going to V-snap it right onto his face. Let me make sure I'm in template mode so this works better. Hold the V key, click it, pops it right onto his jaw bone. However, we don't want to be able to rotate from the tip of the jaw, we want to rotate from the jaw bone. So I need to move the pivot. But let me make sure I have the ring where I want it to be. So let's go to object mode, control vertex, grab these, let's move these in closer. And that could work. I could probably scale it in a little more this way. Alright, so there's a decent jaw control, so I can grab the jaw control and move them around. So let's go back to object mode, click off of there. Alright, so this one is going to be called the jaw control. And let's clear out the history on this. So modify, freeze transformations, edit, delete by type history. And let's make this one green as well so it's easy to see and it looks like the other ones. So Control A, enable overrides, and pop this into green. Awesome. So now we have a jaw control, so I can grab this one and move it around. But again, it's still not centered, so we need to move that pivot point. So let's go to the move command, insert on the keyboard, hold the V key, and snap it right to the jaw bone. So press insert again to get out of the move pivot mode. And if I were to go to rotate, you can see that it'll rotate from the jaw bone to move his jaw up and down. Awesome. So now we have the jaw control set up. We also need a tongue control, but you can either put a line on his tongue, but every time he opens his mouth, you're going to see that line inside there. That's one option that could allow you some controls to move things around, but I'm going to add an attribute to there. So just like the foot roll, I can roll it. So I'm going to grab the curve that the jaw control is. Let's go over to modify, add attribute, and I'm going to go and add, let's say, a tongue control. Sure, that works. And I can pick minimum, maximum if I want to. I guess min, I'll do 0, max, I'll do 10, but you can pick whatever numbers you want. You can do positive and negatives if you want. So tongue control, float the decimals between there. We'll go and add that on there. And since I selected the curve, it goes on to that. I don't need the translates. I don't need the scales or visibility, so let me lock and hide those. Lock and hide selected. So now I just have the rotates and the tongue control. So if you rotate this way, you can see he's kind of twisting his jaw that way. If you rotate this way, he opens it. And if you rotate this way, you kind of slide his jaw left and right. So you have a couple different controls, and you can set how much you're allowed to rotate those. Let's go back to this. We'll pull up the animate set driven key set, and this is under the animation tab. If you're not in the animation tab, these menus look different. Alright, the control is going to be the driver. It drives things. So let's load that, and the tongue control attribute is the one we want. The driven should be the jaw bone. So let's grab the jaw bone. Actually, no, in this case it's the tongue. So we want to grab the tongue because the tongue control will control the tongue. So we'll take this and load this as driven. So it pulls up all these options. And this would be the rotate Z, which should be this direction that we need. So once we have that, and the jaw control, or tongue control is set to 0, so I'm going to go and key that. Oops, it didn't have all 4 highlights on there. Alright, so key that, and that keys it at 0. So when it's 0, it's in place. Now let's set the tongue control to the maximum allowable, which I said was 10. And then let's go and rotate the tongue. So let's click on the tongue joint, rotate it up. Let's say the highest I want it to be allowable is 30. And then we'll go key that. So when the jaw control is at 10, you get 30 degrees. And if I scale this back down, you see it goes down. And so now we have the option to, let's say, grab the jaw control. I can rotate his jaw downwards. Actually, we haven't attached it yet. We need to constrain these now. So we have the control, but it's not controlling the joints. So let's go grab the control curve, which would be the parent. let's go hold shift, grab the entire jaw, not the tongue or the other parts, but the jaw control will control the jaw. We need to constrain orient, which is the orientation of how it's going to look. Make sure it has maintaining offset on there, and press add. So now when I grab this and go to rotate, you can see that it rotates his entire jaw up and down. And when his jaw is, let's say, open, we can take the tongue control and slide that, and he can move his tongue up and down while his mouth is open. Cool. Alright, so that's all set up in place. We have the jaw control, we have the tongue attribute on there. So let's go and rig the eyes together. Alright, so for the eyes, we're going to go and attach, we need an eye control to move things. So let me go to the front view. And that should be front view, close out that. Let's go make a ring. I'm going to draw this right on his eye. And somewhere about the size of his eye should be fine. Sure. Go to move command, jump to here, and make sure we're in template mode. And I'm going to V-snap it onto one of these two joints. It doesn't necessarily matter which one because I'm just going to move it anyway. But this way it centers it right in place. Let's go call this the left eye control. I'll freeze the transformations after I make the second one. Let me go and change Control A. I'm going to change this color to, I guess this is the left eye, so let's make this a light blue color so I know which one's which. Alright, so that does that. And I don't think there's any history, but make nerve circle. I'll edit, delete by type history, clear out that. So that's good. Let's Control D to duplicate it. V-snap it right onto the other eye joint, and let's Control A to pull this up. I'll make this new one the red color so I know which eye is which. Then let's take both of these two joints and pull them directly forward, so now they're on even planes with each other. And I have two of them. I have a red and a blue. Let's clear out the freeze transformations. So freeze those. That should clear that out. So the next thing is to, let's make a global control for these. So let's jump back to the front view. I'm going to make a new circle right in between these, center as I can make it. Let's go to Control Vertex and start shaping this. With the joints on, I can't select it because the joints will take priority. So let's grab the control again, go to Control Vertex, and let me hide the joints. Alright, so the joints are off, so now I can just go across and grab all the control vertices. Let's scale this downwards a bit, somewhere like that. And then I'll take the middle ones and scale these down. I could probably scale down a little more. And then I'll take these, scale these taller and closer in. And I'll take these and pull these further out. So it makes kind of an interesting shape, but then I'll make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so again, you can play with this and make this as fancy as you want to make it. You could take this one, move this one down so it has a different shape. However you want to play with that. Object mode. So this one, I'm going to make this yellow, kind of like the root, because it's the parent. It controls both of these. Let's go to Control A, enable overrides, and make this yellow. Okay, cool. So that's the yellow control, and Control Vertex. I'll move it up a little bit more, kind of keep it even again. Sure. Object mode. Jump back out to here. Now this is not in the right position, so let me grab this and slide this forward. Again, it's kind of hard to snap to something that doesn't have a point to grab. So I'll just kind of eye it up, I guess, as best as possible. Slide it over top those other joints, so that looks pretty good. So now they're aligned in place. But if I move this, it doesn't move the other one. So let's grab the two children, then hold shift, grab the parent, P on the keyboard, and now when I grab just the yellow ring, it'll move both eyes. And if I grab just one of the eyes, I can move just one of the eyes. Alright, but don't grab all three of them at once because it's double offsetting it. So if you want to move both, just grab the one, and it'll move both. Alright, so now we just have to attach these to the eyes. So this one's going to be the parent, it's the control, The child is going to be the eye joint, not the end, but the eye joint itself. So hold shift, grab that, and it highlights the whole thing anyway. So I'll take that, and we're going to put a constrain, orient constrain, no, aim constrain. Put an aim constrain, make sure it has maintain offset on there. We'll apply that, and that should allow us to move the eye around. Cool. So let's grab both of these. I think I forgot to, freeze transformations. So modify, freeze transformations, clear those out. Let me rename this one. Let's call this eyes control. Eyes to the eyes control, and then we have the individual eyes. Actually, I didn't rename this one either. So this is going to be the right eye control. So I have right eye control, left eye control, and the eyes main control. I guess I'd call it main. Eyes main control. Alright, so that does all that. We have one eye that's already rigged to it. Let's grab the other parent, which is the left eye. Hold shift, grab the root of the eye, apply another aim constraint, add that, and now the other eye should move also. And if I grab the global one, I can move both eyes. Cool. So it's going to look even cooler if we can see his eyes move. So we could either parent, originally we could have parented the eyes to it, but in this case we're going to bind. So I'm going to take one eye, actually this is reference mode, so click on one eye, hold shift, grab the bone, and we're going to go to skin, bind skin, rigid bind. And we're going to cover this later when we get to painting weights. This is how you attach the mesh to your bones, but in order to test the eyes, let's attach them right now. Smooth bind will be more for squashy stretch, rigid bind is going to be more for things that aren't going to squash and stretch, like the eye. It's just going to move. It's not going to squash and stretch much. Alright, so I'll take the rigid bind. I mean, they can still squash, but it's good enough. So let's rigid bind that. Alright, and so now when I take this one, it should move the eye, which we can't really see because it doesn't have any colors on there. So let me do the other one, and then we'll take a look at what it does. So hold shift, grab both of these together, skin, rigid bind. Boom. Actually, I probably should have, when you do rigid bind, make sure it's set to selected joints. You want to bind it selectively to the joint, not the complete skeleton, because you don't want to have his fingers controlling his eyes. You want to make sure that the selected joints, which is the one we picked, is the one that's controlling it explicitly. Alright, so let's close that. So let's show and turn off the joints so I don't see the joints. And if I take this one, his eyes will move, but we can't really see it. So let me put this in 6 on the keyboard, which will pull up our textures. And now when I move this, you can see his eyes move. How cool is that? So his eyes can move up and down and look wherever he looks at. If we go over here and rotate his head, this is probably going to look a bit weird, but his eyes are separate from his head because we haven't binded the entire mesh to it. But at least at the moment, you can see that the eyes are attached and they continually look at our direction. So if I move this wherever I want, he can look at many different directions. Also of note, we want to make sure we want to get rid of these other things. We don't need scale and visibility on any of these. So let me grab all of these. No scale and visibility, lock and hide selected. And then these don't need rotates. You're not going to really rotate the eyes, so let's lock and hide selected. Alright, so you just have the translates. This one I could lock and hide the rotates as well, but it's interesting when you play with this, you can kind of rotate this, and as you rotate it, it kind of creates different effects on his eyes. So if you wanted to leave the rotations, you can. Otherwise, you can just remove those. Alright, so that finishes up the eye controls. So now we have the eyes. We have the entire root of the character, which is all attached now. Let me put this back in shaded mode and show my joints so I can see what I'm doing. Alright, so we have the joints all in place. We have the head done. We have the tongue and jaw control, the eyes. We have the feet and legs all done, and the hips and body. So the very last thing we have to do now is basically the arms and hands, and then we'll create a main global root control.